there's so much corporate welfare that goes to Wall Street, and so much corporate welfare that goes to these large companies that benefit off of us. And I would like to see a push for economic bills that directly invest in our communities. Education as well. We want better schools, and we want better pathways to higher education. Esteban Garces, co-director of Poder Latinx, right?
Yes, that's great.
Glad to talk to you today, because I think that our community definitely has to start keeping an eye on things. I know that we have, but I think that now our goals are shifting. I think past 4 years, you could say that the Latinx community was very focused on taking out, Donald Trump and some of the, anti-immigration, anti-Hispanic rhetoric that they heard. Now that we have the Democrats in office, I'm reading some of the Poder Latinx releases, and one of them was about how our community helped the passage of the Stimulus Act of, what is it called?
American Rescue Plan.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about how our community contributed to getting that passed?
Sure. It really has to do with the makeup of the Senate. The Democrats have the Senate by literally the vice president, who is the tiebreaker in the Senate. And what our organization did in late 2019, we took a look at the map of where our community was present, where we were growing as an electorate. And we took a look at Georgia, because something funny was going on there, or unique, I should say, in that the electorate was expanding pretty fast. And the electorate was also 70% of the folks we generally talk to, the folks that we want to engage in, were under the age of 35. And that's such a wide swath of an electorate that's so young. So we decided in September of last year to enter into Georgia and cooperate with the other organizations on the ground to reach out to our Latinx community, because we knew that the balance of the Senate back then, we knew it could hinge on Georgia. If Georgia could force 2 runoff elections into a special election in January, then it's almost a wild card as to what could happen. Special elections are very unpredictable. So that was our intent going into Georgia in September. So working along with allies and other coalition partners, we were able to successfully push for 2 runoffs to happen in January by mobilizing the Latinx vote, along with other great partners on the ground who mobilized Latinx and Black communities to vote. And then in January 5th, the second part of this historic election happened, right? Georgia, for the first time in almost a lifetime for some folks, have now 2 U.S. senators who are Democrats. And the balance of the Senate has been 50-50 now since January 5th, since that election. So that means that the tiebreaker resides with the vice president. Our role in this was to make sure that that first election happened in November, and that in January 5th, we had elected representatives who look out for our values, our principles, and were going to stand with us on those critical things that we needed, such as this recovery plan.
Okay. So do the Democrats recognize the role that our community played in helping them get to the position they're in now? Are we feeling the love, is what I'm trying to say?
We're feeling the love. I mean, compared to the last 4 years, it was not just about getting by, it's almost about survival. We were targeted in El Paso, Texas. 20 plus folks died targeted because of hate crimes. It's sad what's happening in Georgia right now as well, with the Asian community that's been targeted. But we've also felt that in El Paso, Texas. We've been hearing that since Donald Trump came down his golden escalators before, when he announced his presidency, his candidacy 4 years plus ago. And it's been nonstop ever since. And so, it's been very tough. Hate crimes have been up against the Latinx community just consistently during his tenure as president. And now we have an opportunity to breathe and to let our guard down a little bit and see what's going on as far as the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, and President Biden. We've seen executive orders passed and pursued that directly benefit our community. We have 4 or 5 pieces of legislation floating in Congress that are going to directly benefit our community. But it doesn't mean that we let it.
About those? Like, can you tell us about some of these executive actions and some of the legislation that's on the floor right now that benefit the Latinx community?
Sure. So one of the executive actions that just took place really has to do with the most recent one is temporary protected status for Venezuelans, which is a wide swath of the community that exists in Florida, for example. And it was kind of like used almost as a carrot, I think, in the last election, unfortunately, with the previous administration on what could happen with Venezuela. Biden, in his first 100 days, he made a commitment before his first 100 days, we're going to pass TPS for Venezuelans. And lo and behold, 100 days isn't over yet, and we have TPS for Venezuelans. We're seeing a lot of what Biden also promised was immigration legislation from the administration to Congress in the first 100 days. We have that. That's the Menendez bill that's in the U.S. Senate. It has a counterpart in the Congress as well, and that exists. It's probably the most comprehensive and beneficial immigration legislation that's been introduced in the last 20 years. That's most encompassing. Doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. Absolutely not. It means we still have work ahead of us to do, so we can't let our guard down completely, but we should be able to at least breathe a little bit. And once we catch our breath, we need to jump on the phones, call our U.S. senators, call our congressional reps, and say, hey, this has got to pass.
So when I listen to a lot of the acts, the legislation that the Democrats propose that benefit our community, I hear a lot of protections for human rights, a lot of humanitarian legislation. Aside from the stimulus checks, what kind of legislation or what kind of acts, what kind of help has our community got economically from the Democrats? Or is there anything that's being planned for the future that will help us economically?
Well, I think what you're going to see in the American Rescue Plan, and there's a question on the timing of when these checks or funds are going to be released, but the idea is that $1,400 are going to make it to the accounts of our community that's paying into the system as far as paying their taxes. And that's a big boon to our community, especially now during a pandemic when joblessness is still, peaking. I think there's 250,000 new jobs lost in the last quarter across the country, right? So this investment back into our community is happening now, and it happens at a time that we need it to happen. It's not just happening just because, we should also take some pride in that we made this happen, right? We delivered the Senate along with Black communities, Asian communities in Georgia and across Arizona and other places as well. We made sure that this happened. And this isn't just free money that's being given out. This is funding that we have contributed into the system. And now when we, the people, the community, need this funding back into our pockets, it's going to make its way back to us.
I mean, the $1,400 is definitely help, and it's definitely something that can stem the tide temporarily for some people. But ultimately, a lot of Latino business owners lost their business over the past year, right? So, are there any economic plans that the Democrats? I mean, because I'm going to just be a little challenging here because I think it's healthy for our community to do this, and to not have the Democrats take us for granted. And so, are there any plans that help Latino business owners, whether it's small business owners or even larger business owners that either are own, managed, or heavily employ people from our community to get back off the ground, to create jobs, to invest in our communities? Or even, I don't want to just stick to economics, education. Are there any plans that the Democrats have to improve the education in our community so that our children can be more prepared when they go out into the world of jobs and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I do believe that the American the American Rescue Plan addresses some of those, but at the same time, I don't want to, frame this also as like the Democrats have all the answers and the Republicans are the enemy or anything along those lines, because the threat is, or the concern is that, yes, we could be, not taken advantage of, but taken for granted in the future, right? This really is a democracy, and it's about our participation. And our organization focuses and hones in on that because we know there are folks, friends, allies that stand with us today, but there's also the other part of this democracy, which needs to remember that we have to keep pressure on those allies, friends, those folks who stand with us today to make sure that tomorrow they're also standing with us, right? So I don't think we're ever going to have a scenario where, we do our job on November 3rd or January 5th, and then we can just relax from there on out. We have to continue to be engaged because all of these bills, they're a great start. For them to pass, there's got to be political pressure, political will for that to happen. And sometimes, oftentimes, the political will and political pressure gets created by the communities directly impacted. So, I just want to go back to what you were saying previously in that we shouldn't be taken for granted. We have to continue to engage in this democracy, lift up our voices, and make sure that we're heard.
Now, I really value a lot of the work that organizations like Poder Latinx do. Number one, you're showing the power of our community. I think that it is constructive that you help at least the party that is not attacking you, right? But now that you help them, you have to remind them that you help them. You have to remind them how valuable you are, and we want more. I think that that's one thing that I just kind of want to put out there. We want more, whether it's citizenship for DACA students and not continuing to kick the ball down the road, which the Democrats continue to do, and saying, yeah, we'll be the ones to help you, but they don't really seal the deal for us, or not for us. I'm not a DACA recipient, but people that are DACA recipients, there's what, 700,000 of them. These are educated, law-abiding Americans that just aren't official. So we got to stay on that. And we need the economic help. There's so much corporate welfare that goes to Wall Street, and so much corporate welfare that goes to these large companies that benefit off of us. And I would like to see a push for economic bills that directly invest in our communities. Education as well. We want better schools, and we want better pathways to higher education. So I hope that you guys continue the fight. And I hope that you guys also look at some of those things that I think are the next thing. I understand that the past 4 years, there was a much more dire need to confront attacks on our community. But as we start looking forward, there's other things that we need to deal with. And so do you think Poder Latinx will start shifting to some of these other things that I've been talking about, economics, education?
I think also, to maybe reframe what you're mentioning is that you're also talking about accountability, right? Because we have to make sure that those promises that were made on the campaign trail are kept. And it can't be empty promises and kind of like a show of, it looks like I did what you asked me to do, and then I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to focus on something else, right? But that also falls on organizations like ours to own that responsibility, to hold us elected officials accountable, to continue to engage our community on these important issues, to make sure that's not forgotten. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's what you're saying. It's, this is who we are, this is what we did, and this is what we want. That's the formula, right? And the what we want is just as important as the other pieces there, because today it's this, but tomorrow it's going to be something else. And if we continue building an electorate that's informed, and if we continue engaging community, whether or not they are voters, but they still have power, they still have a voice, to put pressure on elected officials, we will get to what we want. But that's going to continue to evolve.
Awesome. And how can people find out more about Poder Latinx and even, take part?
Sure. Our website, www.poderlatinx.org. Feel free to visit us there. Also on social media channels as Poder Latinx. I believe Somos Poder Latinx on Facebook and Instagram. Always looking for folks to engage, especially around climate, economic justice, and immigrant justice.
Awesome. I'm going to follow up with you on the economic justice. I think we got a good conversation here, man. Dude, thanks for joining me.